The movie begins as Steve, father of the Graham family, calls his son Peter Graham to get himself ready for their grandmother Ellen Taper Lee's funeral. He also finds his daughter Charlie, whom he finds is still sleeping. He wakes her up as they need to go quickly. Annie, Steve's wife, sits in the car preparing her speech for her mother's funeral. They arrive at the funeral and Annie nervously delivers her speech, while Charlie draws a strange sketch. It can be seen that Charlie also makes weird clicking noises. Later that evening, Annie, an artist who sculpts mini dioramas, works in her studio for an upcoming exhibition. Steve on the other hand checks on the kids and says his goodnight. Unlike the rest of the family, Charlie is genuinely saddened by Ellen's death. Annie comforts her, reminding Charlie that she is Grandma's favorite. However, Charlie claims that her grandmother had always hoped she was a boy. Concerned about who will care for her if her mother dies, Charlie expresses her worry. In response, Annie assures her that Steve or Peter will look after her if that ever happens. In her studio that night, Annie browses through a memory book. There, she encounters a photo of her mother smiling at her in the dark, sparking fear in her. Before leaving, Annie notices the phrase, "Say Tony," written on Charlie's wall. Disturbed, she conceals her miniature diorama, depicting Ellen trying to breastfeed Charlie. At school, Charlie witnesses a bird hitting their classroom windows. Amid her classmates fussing about it, she gazes at a pair of scissors deeply in thought about something. Later, Charlie heads outside to examine the bird, then cuts its head and casually stows it in her pocket. Enjoying her favorite chocolate in a laid-back manner, she suddenly notices a woman across the street waving at her. The next morning, Annie is working in her studio when she notices her mother's room is open, revealing a sizable triangle drawn on the floor. Terrified by the sight, Annie closes it and asks her husband if he entered Ellen's room, to which he denies before locking it up to avoid further distress. After that, Steve receives a call from a cemetery informing him of Ellen's desecrated grave. Despite this, he decides not to tell his wife so as to not worry her. Annie then tells her husband that she's going to the cinema, but she actually goes to another place to attend a therapy group. At the therapy session, Annie opens up bluntly about her mother's mental health concerns, encompassing dissociative identity disorder and dementia. She then delves into her family history, recounting her father's struggle with psychotic depression leading to self-starvation and her schizophrenic brother's tragic suicide. Annie proceeds to reveal her mother's manipulative tendencies and the guilt she experienced when Ellen became sick. She concludes her confession that she feels attacked but she doesn't understand where it's coming from. Crafting a mannequin in her room the following morning, Charlie notices an unusual light leading outside. In a trance-like state, she walks to the back of their house, holding the bird's head. At the same time, the gallery owner contacts Annie about the status of her new creations. Annie, in response, goes to her room to photograph them. Suddenly, Peter enters, asking for permission to take the car to a school party to see Bridget, a classmate he likes. Annie, concerned, questions whether Charlie is going with him, prompting Peter to immediately search for his sister. In the field, Charlie is surprised to see her grandmother surrounded by flames. Clicking her tongue as if calling Ellen, she is suddenly dragged back to the house by the angry Annie, who scolds her that it's too cold outside. Despite Charlie expressing her desire to have Ellen back, Annie forces her to go with Peter to the party, hoping she'll make friends. On their way to the party, Peter, visibly annoyed by Charlie's constant tongue-clicking, and they pass by a telephone pole adorned with a strange symbol. At the party, Peter swiftly notices Bridget alone on the couch. Wanting to spend time with her, he invites her to smoke pot, leaving Charlie alone in the midst of the crowd. While eating some desserts, Charlie is unaware that it contains nuts, to which she's highly allergic. She soon finds it hard to breathe due to an anaphylactic reaction and she informs her brother about it. Peter immediately carries his sister to the car and drives along a dark road to the hospital. As Charlie struggles to breathe in the back seat, Peter speeds up. Not realizing that Charlie has popped her head out of the window to get some fresh air, while driving, Peter uncontrollably swerves to avoid a dead deer on the road. Unfortunately, this causes Charlie's head to smash into a post. In shock, Peter abruptly stops and sits, staring at the road, trying to comprehend the situation in which he lost his sister. Peter drives and attempts to face reality. He tries looking at the rearview mirror but stops. He is traumatized by the accident. When he reaches home, he leaves the car behind without a backward glance, heading directly to his room. Peter spends the night lying in bed the whole day contemplating what happened. The following day, Graham's family awoke from Annie's screams echoing through the house upon discovering the headless Charlie in the car. Annie continues to cry mourning for the loss of her daughter. Meanwhile, Peter remains consumed by his guilt and quietly stays in his room. The day after Charlie's funeral, Peter has a panic attack. His friends attempts to calm him down, as he sobs saying that his throat feels like it's getting bigger. When he arrives home, he prepares himself and goes inside. His mother sees him as she sits in the car still grieving. She drives to the therapy group but decides not to go. A member of the support group named Joan notices her and asks her to stay. She sympathizes with her loss and she shares her loss, her child and grandson. She tells her that she will be available for her if ever she needs her help. Annie gets home. Melancholic rejects Steve's comfort and goes into Charlie's room to sleep there. Peter on the other hand hears Charlie's tongue-clicking noise and he gets scared by it. Morning comes and Annie talks with Joan about the events involving Charlie. There was a night before when a sleepwalking Annie bathes Peter and Charlie with paint thinner with a match in another hand ready to light it up when she woke up. At dinner, Annie doesn't touch her food and seems to be in deep thought. Peter breaks the silence asking her why she stares at him, to which, she bursts out blaming him for Charlie's death. She shouts that no one in the family owns their mistakes. He reminds her that she was the one who forced Charlie to come with him in the first place. Annie storms outside frustrated at everything. The following day, Annie meets Joan who shares her experience attending a séance. She suggests to her that performing a séance can allow her to communicate with her deceased Charlie. She encourages her they perform the ritual. In Joan's apartment, she initiates the ritual and claims to contact her grandson through a glass and a chalkboard. The chalk moves on its own scaring Annie. Joan calms her and tells her that even she can perform those tricks by using items previously used by the deceased. She drives home and gets spooked by clicking noise usually heard from Charlie. At night, Annie wakes up to see Peter's lifeless body swarmed by ants. Peter tells her that she's sleepwalking and asks why she seems afraid. To which, Annie states that she never intended to have Peter. He cries and they both get engulfed in flames. Annie wakes up only to realize that she was having a nightmare within a nightmare. She thinks for a while and suddenly remembers Joan's spell. She wakes her husband and Peter to perform another séance. Initially, both males disagrees, but seeing the mother getting desperate, they eventually agree to join. As they call for Charlie's spirit, temperature drops and objects fly in front of them. Annie calls for Charlie, however, there is only quiet. Peter is terrified when suddenly, a glass behind them. There, we see the complexion of Annie changes, seemingly possessed by something else. Steve throws water at her and breaks the trance. The following morning, Peter sees a light. From it, he sees his own reflection evilly smiling at him. He gets terrified by this and runs away from the school. Meanwhile, Annie gets a call from Steve who tells her about Peter's incident. He tells her that they have to protect their son. They hang up. This time Annie receives another call from the gallery. She breaks a small chair in the studio causing her to get mad and destroy everything else. At home, Peter is tormented by visions of his dead sister in his room. From outside, the dog's barks can be heard. Suddenly, Peter feels someone grab his head. He is terrified and screams for help. When Annie gets home, the sensation stops and Peter accuses her of doing it. Annie denies it and warns him of the malicious happenings in the house. She then grabs the sketchbook that she uses to call the spirit of Charlie and throws it into the fireplace. But suddenly, her arm also catches fire just as how the book catches fire. Realizing that they are connected, she retrieves it back from the fireplace which also stops the fire on her arm. Annie visits Joan's home the next day, only to discover her apartment filled with summoning rituals, weird symbols with a photo of Peter close beside it. She then notices a weird, but familiar rug that belongs to her mother Ellen. Meanwhile, Joan is seen at Peter's school. From outside the fence, she shouts towards Peter and that she expels Peter. Peter is confused and looks around to see if he's the one targeted. Annie gets back at home to discover a book about a demon of hell named Paimon. From the book, she sees the symbols associated with him. She also discovers pictures of Joan and her mother Ellen. The truth reveals that they are both in a cult to revive and summon Paimon inside a male body, namely Peter. She is shocked by this sudden revelations and decides to hide her mother's belongings in the attic. However, from there, she sees Ellen's headless body filled with the symbol that she saw in the book. At school, Peter hears clicking noises when suddenly, a force slams his head onto his desk. He is terribly scared and runs away from school. Steve on the other hand worries about the recent happenings with his family. He contemplates sending Annie to a mental hospital for treatment. He gets Peter who is scared out of his mind. Night comes and Steve talks with his wife who tells her that Ellen's body is up in their attic. He goes up and confirms that it is truly there. Ellen then panics and tries to tell him that no one can help them because of the cult involved. She shows him images of Joan and Ellen wearing clothing similar to the symbol used in the book. She tells Steve that they made a mistake when they conducted the seance. The book belonging to Charlie must be destroyed to bring an end to everything. However, Steve does not believe her and throws the sketchbook into the fire. Suddenly, instead of burning Annie, fire engulfs Steve. Just then, Annie gets possessed by an evil spirit. This wakes up Peter who goes out of his room to investigate. He looks around not noticing his possessed mother flying just behind him. The creepy Annie crawls from the wall as Peter searches for his parents. Finally, he sees his father's dead body. He grieves for his father when he sees a man creepily smiling at him. Then, his possessed mother pursues him until he locks himself up in the attic. Her mother greatly terrifies her as she rams her head crazily onto the door. In the attic, a summoning ritual is revealed as pictures of him, and candles to summon out-of-this-world entities, are all over the place. He tries to slap himself hoping that it is all a nightmare. However, it is very real as she sees her mother flying up towards him and decapitating herself using a wire. Outside, she sees other people smiling at him. He gets overwhelmed and jumps out of the window. A glowing light then moves towards him, and when it enters his body, he gets revived. He follows Annie's headless body toward the treehouse. From there, all of Paimon's cult is seen. Charlie's head is also laid on top of a statue with Paimon symbols. Joan then goes to him and they bow to him as he is revived as Paimon. Thank you for watching.